Assalamu alaikum. Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Shahda Osman. I'm a medical doctor and trained epidemiologist and bioethicist with a concentration in research ethics. I would like to discuss with you in this session the informed consent process. The objectives of this session will be to describe the reasons why research subjects may choose to participate in research, to define what is meant by an informed consent, to demonstrate how consent has been addressed in ethics guidelines, to describe the process of obtaining a valid consent, to explain the elements, essential and additional elements of an informed consent, and finally to describe conditions where there could be a waiver of the informed consent. So why do research subjects participate in research? There are a number of reasons cited in the literature for why humans would participate in research. Reasons listed include issues such as humanity and altruism. In Arabic that would be translated to ithar, which people are willing to sacrifice to humanity. Another reason is receiving free medications and medical care. This might be more evident with low socioeconomic status and in low resource settings. Then there is a hope for a new powerful treatment and possible improvement of cure from participating. And some others would participate for attention from doctors or interest in advancing science or even monetary incentives such as like in phase 1 trials. So how do we define informed consent? Informed consent is a process by which a study participant voluntarily confirms his or her willingness to participate in a particular research, after having been informed of all aspects of the research that are relevant to the study participant's decision to participate. So it is a voluntary agreement and not just a signed form. Participants should understand the research and that they're being in a research and the risks. It is essential before enrolling participants in the study, and it should be obtained for all types of human research, including diagnostic, therapeutic, interventional, social, and behavioral studies. The informed consent is documented by means of a written, signed, and dated informed consent form. So the form is there to document, but actually having the consent is a process in itself. Informed consent has been noted in most or in all major ethics guidelines. The following slides will demonstrate how it has been mentioned. So in the Nuremberg Code, the first statement in the code said the voluntary consent of the human subject is absolutely essential. Then in this code there was another paragraph explaining that it should be voluntarily with absence of coercion, undue inducement, and exploitation. The Belmont Report states that respect for persons requires that subjects, to the degree that they are capable, be given the opportunity to choose what shall or shall not happen to them. This opportunity is provided when adequate standards for informed consent are satisfied. The Declaration of Helsinki stated that participation by individuals capable of giving informed consent as subjects in medical research must be voluntary. Although it may be appropriate to consult family members or community leaders, no individual capable of giving informed consent may be enrolled in a research study unless he or she feels freely agrees. Of note, there is an entire section on informed consent in the Declaration. It starts from the points 25 to 32. Those 7 statements cover requirements for capable persons, avoidance of undue inducement, seeking assent when participant is incapable to give consent, voluntariness, and seeking informed consent when using identifiable material. In the CM's guidelines, it stated that researchers have a duty to provide potential research participants with the information and the opportunity to give their free and informed consent to participate in research, or to decline to do so, unless a research ethics committee has approved a waiver or modification of informed consent. Informed consent should be understood as a process, and participants have a right to withdraw at any point in the study without retribution. In the national guidelines of Sudan, which have been revised in 2017, there was a statement that the informed consent reflects the ethical principle of respect to persons and their autonomous decision. Enrolling individuals in research studies without their authorization is to treat them merely as a means to an end they might not even agree with. So, when we look at the informed consent, there are main 3 important aspects that we need to have in order to obtain a valid consent. These include disclosure of information and considering the decision-making capacity and comprehension by the participant or potential participant, and the voluntariness of the process or the voluntariness of the consent when given by the participant. So what is needed is a researcher needs to disclose all the essential information in an informed consent. And in the coming slides, we will talk about what are the essential and what are additional information that are supposed to be disclosed in the consent process. Afterwards, they need to make sure that the participant understood them, and they need to avoid any possible means that can introduce coercion, undue inducement, or exploitation of participants when giving the consent, and that's the way to ensure voluntariness. So they have to disclose the information, make sure the participant understands it, which is the part consistent of comprehension, and make sure that there are no coercion, undue inducement, or exploitation of the participants, which ensures that their decision to participate or not has been voluntary. So the first condition for obtaining a valid informed consent is the disclosure of information. And in the disclosure of information, we divide the elements to two sort of elements that need to be disclosed. We have the essential elements, which is the basic information that must be covered in any informed consent process, and additional elements that are pieces of information that need to be given to potential subjects when appropriate, and this is dependent on the characteristics of the study and the needs of the study population. In the essential elements, we have 8 different elements. We have the purpose of the study, risks, benefits, alternatives, confidentiality, compensation, contact information, and voluntary participation. We will go through these elements one by one. First, we have the purpose of the research that needs to be described to participants. It is a statement that involves that this study is research. So the participants needs to understand that this is a research. An explanation of the purposes of the research, the expected duration of the subject's participation in this study, a description of the procedures to be followed. So what exactly is the subject or participant expecting while being a participant in the research? Probability of random assignment, and that is in clinical trials, for instance. If you have a randomized controlled study or a randomized controlled trial and there is random allocation, the subject needs to understand that they will be randomly allocated to either arm of the study. And identification of any procedures that are experimental. So which of the procedures in the study are the purpose of an experiment or an investigation, and which are routine or something that the subject will be faced with even if he is not part of a research study. The second element is the risks and the benefits. So there needs to be a description of any reasonably foreseeable risk or discomforts to the subjects in the study. The reasonably foreseeable risk or inconveniences to an embryo fetus or a nursing infant. A description of any benefits to the subjects or to others which may be reasonably expected from the. Then we have alternatives. And here we expect from the researcher a disclosure of appropriate alternative procedures or courses of treatment, if any, that may advantage to the subject. So the subject must not think that the research intervention or procedure or treatment or experimental treatment is their only option. If there are any other options, these need to be disclosed in the informed consent. Then we have the research question. So there should be an explanation of whom to contact for answers to pertinent questions about the research and research subject. If the participant needs to ask something and needs to complain from something, there needs to be enough information for them in the informed consent as whom to contact in the event of a research-related injury to the participant or any even kind of complaint. A researcher can insert phone numbers of the PI, of the research ethics committees, and then there's confidentiality. A statement describing the extent, if any, to which confidentiality of records identifying the subject will be maintained. So how do you as a researcher ensure that the information they will give to you, the participants, will not be shared and will be specifically like identifying them, and how will you keep it within the research? The subject needs to understand exactly how the records are maintained and kept confidential. If there is an inspection of other agencies that might see the records, this also needs to be explained in the informed consent. If the results of the trials are published, the study participant's identity will remain confidential. You need to let the participant understand this fact. Compensation for injury. Research that involves more than minimal risk, there needs to be an explanation as to whether any compensation and an explanation as to whether any medical treatments are available if injury occurs. So they need to know what they consist of and whether further information may be obtained. The compensation and/or treatment available to the subject in the event of trial-related injury. The anticipated payment, if any, to the study participant for participating in a trial. Voluntary participation. Here, the researcher needs to include in the consent a statement that the participation in research is voluntary, that refusal to participate will not involve any kind of penalty or loss of benefits to which the subject is otherwise entitled, and that the subject may discontinue participation at any time without penalty or loss of benefits to which the subject is otherwise entitled. Next are the additional elements, the elements that may be present in some kind of researches but may not be in every single research needed. So you have termination of a subject participation, unforeseeable risks, consequences of withdrawal, new findings for consent, anticipated expenses, number of subjects, and incentives. So you need to have, in some kind of studies, a statement that the particular treatment or procedure may involve risks to the subjects or to the embryo or fetus if the subject is or may become pregnant, which are currently unforeseeable. And that is when you are anticipating that special conditions might give risks or might involve a risk or present some sort of harm that you are not sure what kind of harm that is. So we call these unforeseeable risks. They cannot be revealed unless they actually occur. And then we have the anticipated circumstances to terminate subject's participation by the investigator without regard to the subject's consent. And this could include issues like a deterioration in the health status, or if a subject is not compliant to the procedures, or whatever the investigator has put in the protocol that would affect the validity of the study and will need a termination of a participant. So if there are such anticipated circumstances, then they should be stated clearly in the informed. Incentives are sometimes given in research to facilitate participation, and if this happens, these kind of incentives should be written in the informed consent if a research subject might be receiving them during the study. Then there are the anticipated expenses, if any, to the study participation. So if a participant is expected to face some sort of expenses while participating in the trial, then this should be clearly stated in the informed consent. And then there are the consequences of a subject's decision to withdraw from the research and procedures for orderly termination. So if they decide to withdraw, what exactly are the consequences? How will he be terminated? What kind of procedures need to be done to do that? Number 6 is a statement that significant new findings developed during the course of the research, which may relate to the subject's willingness to continue participation, will be provided to the subject. So if there has been, for instance, intermittent analysis, and things have been discovered in the research that may affect the participant's decision to continue or not. Maybe a side effect that was not anticipated has started to appear, or which arm of the drug is better. Some sort of analysis has really shown it, and the researcher or the participant might change their willingness to continue with the study. Any kind of new information that or new findings that developed should be disclosed to the participants to continue with their decision or not. And number 7 is the approximate number of subjects involved in the study. Now we come to the second condition for obtaining a valid informed consent, and that is comprehension. As we said before, informed consent is not a document, and given a potential subject, the document alone does not constitute a consent. So you can have all the information we listed above, which include disclosure in the document, and give it to the participant, and they sign, but that would not be a valid consent. What we need to do is make sure that this participant understands those elements that have been described and disclosed. Thus, when we tend to write informed consent forms, we need to be using lay terms, which is a language level understandable to all participants being consented, and it must include all basic elements and additional elements as appropriate. When obtaining informed consent, we need to use the appropriate evidence-based methods to explain the research to the potential subjects. These may include information leaflets, may include audiovisual aids to supplement written material, and sometimes even after giving the consent, asking questions to the participants to ensure they understood what they were told. There are many factors that may actually affect comprehension. These include literacy levels. They may include culture, beliefs, maturity, the ability of the researcher to communicate effectively, and their competence in obtaining informed consent may also, to a degree, influence the level of comprehension. Now we come to the third condition for obtaining a valid informed consent, and that is voluntariness. For an informed consent to be voluntary, the potential subject needs to make their decision to participate in the research study without coercion, intimidation, or undue inducement. These concepts have been described in another session of this course. Voluntariness can be jeopardized in different circumstances where potential subjects are deemed vulnerable. And for vulnerable populations or vulnerable subjects, extra protections need to be in place. So we come to the signature of the informed consent form. Who do we want to sign an informed consent form? There are three signatures that can be present in the informed consent. The signature of the research participants, and that is to say to a document that they approve to participate in the study. The signature of the principal investigator or an authorized person, that could be the person also taking the consent, and a witness of the process. Another issue we would like to discuss is the waiver of informed consent or the waiver of consent. In general, research should not be initiated in humans without obtaining the individual's informed consent or that of a legally authorized representative, unless a research ethical committee approved otherwise. A research needs to justify certain conditions for a waiver to be accepted by research ethics committees. So the researcher needs to prove that the research would not be feasible or practicable to carry out without the waiver or modification. Also, the research needs to have an important social value and pose no more than minimal risk to participants. So these three conditions need to be fulfilled when seeking waiver of an informed consent. Sometimes researchers ask for a waiver of signature, which is they do take a consent, they talk to the participant, disclose the information, and the participant understands it and agree to the research, but what they want to waive is the signature, which means that they do not want participants to sign on a document to document informed consent. And this may be justified in studies that carry an increased risk of harm if a breach of confidentiality occurs. So research ethics committees may approve a waiver of documentation if the research subjects does not want their identities linked with the subject. And here there are some high-risk studies that might involve political information, sensitive information, like things that related to stigma perhaps, and they do not want to be identified in those studies. And the only record linking the subject to the research that might identify them is in that status, the informed consent, so they would rather not sign it. Example, research with intravenous drug users that may have like legal implications. So in that case, research ethics committees can approve a waiver of signature. Also, if the research presents no more than minimal risk to subjects and involves no procedures for which written consent is longer required outside the research context, it may be considered for waiver of consent. For further information, you may consult the ethics guidelines, such as the SIEMS guidelines 2016 is the latest version, Declaration of Helsinki, Development Report, and there's guidelines in Sudan, which are the guidelines for ethical conduct of research involving human subjects. Thank you.